In a recent Gizmodo article, Tony Gilroy made a statement that shows his philosophy is completely opposite to that of George Lucas. Many who are critical of the show Andor draw on this, claiming that Andor is not even Star Wars, whatever that means. But while this may appear to be a contradiction at first, I actually believe that Tony did exactly what George Lucas wanted to do all along, but couldn't. Let me explain. How's it going, everyone? Welcome to the channel today. My name is Jeremy, and this is The Force Fandom. This is a channel for regular fans who love Star Wars, and if that's you, you're in the right place, so hit that subscribe button, and let's jump into this topic today, talking about Tony Gilroy's philosophical approach to Star Wars being antithetical to what George Lucas had originally created. There's a lot here. We're going to talk about it. Now, people have been talking about this for a long time. This isn't necessarily anything new, but people are starting to pick up on this because Tony Gilroy recently said in a Gizmodo interview this: "We would never add anybody for fun. We're not going to add anyone for a smile or a wink or anything like that. There's nothing in there that's just some juicy tidbit just for the hell of it. Everything has to be organic." And this is kind of pushing against fan service, not leaning into nostalgia. But listen what he says next. This is really the point. "That's been our attitude all the way through. Not to be cynical and to take it more seriously than anybody ever took it. Even while we're changing, some people feel though it's changing a lot, but even while we're changing the grammar of what you can do, we're trying very rigorously to be more serious about this than anybody ever has been." Strong words from Tony Gilroy. And notice what he said there. He talked about changing the grammar of what you can do. We know for a long time, anyone who's followed Star Wars, you know that George has talked about how everything is supposed to rhyme in Star Wars, how it's supposed to be like this opera that rhymes and comes together. And Tony is kind of throwing that out the window, or at least seeming to throw that out the window and say, we're changing the grammar. It doesn't necessarily all rhyme, but we're being serious about this. So no wonder there's some that are going to say, this isn't Star Wars. It doesn't feel like it. It doesn't sound like it. Well, at least that's the claim, if you can even really measure those things down to the dialogue and the characters, because I actually believe Andor is leaning heavy into what Star Wars truly is and kind of ripping back the goofy exterior at times and showing the real heart of this rebellion. But we can argue back and forth about that. The real test here is what Tony is saying here really a ripping apart of George Lucas, saying that George didn't take this seriously, that other people have not taken this seriously? I mean, we all know that many folks looked at the prequels and really didn't enjoy the character of Jar Jar Binks, myself included. I think he was a problem, and I think actually the whole entire thing gets better if you take Jar Jar out of there. And that's coming from one who still enjoys the prequels, but is willing to admit their flaws. Is this a shot at the other writers and directors who have been doing Star Wars shows? Knowing Tony Gilroy, I would say no. I think he is very respectful of those around him. But what he is saying is we're all working really hard and taking really seriously, one, sticking to canon. He mentions that earlier in the article. Two, making sure we're not just throwing things in there to throw them in there. In other articles, he's talked about how probably Jyn Erso is not going to show up in season 2 because it doesn't make sense, whereas characters like Saw Gerrera and Krennic from Rogue One will be in season 2. Saw was already in season 1, but you get the idea of what I'm talking about. He's really being cautious with how they're building this thing. But are they supposed to be this serious? Isn't Star Wars supposed to be for 12-year-old boys? Isn't that the point? And so if this is what Tony Gilroy's vision is, it's completely antithetical to George Lucas's vision of Star Wars. Or at least that's what you might think. If you remember recently, there was a lot of hype and conversation about some of the information that came out about George Lucas's planned television series that never happened. I didn't cover it here on the channel, but tons of other creators did. If you haven't seen it, you can check out their videos. I'll throw some of their links down below for you to look at. But the point being, George Lucas's television show that he wrote 60 scripts for. 60, not 12, not 24, like all of the Andor scripts. 60 scripts were written, and this show was dark, serious. Much like Andor, it was Star Wars for adults. Even some calling it sexy, right? Like, this is a different Star Wars. And so to say, Tony Gilroy's philosophy is antithetical to George Lucas' Star Wars misses the point. And it just is kind of a straw man argument. You're using what you think it all is just to speak against Andor, when in reality, George Lucas wanted to do the very thing we're seeing. Now, not exactly. It was a post-Return of the Jedi show. It wasn't a prequel to Rogue One. It would have been a little bit different, using some of the characters that we all know and love and already were built into the canon, but it was going to be a dark, crime-ridden, all of these syndicates working, trying for power in the post-fall of the Empire. Like, it sounds like a lot of the fighting and the red tape and the people who would be grabbing and backstabbing, a lot like what we're seeing in Andor. A lot like the battle inside the interior of the Empire right now. A lot of how Tony is approaching this wouldn't necessarily rhyme, and it doesn't sound like what George was doing was going to rhyme in the way that people are thinking. He was going to change the grammar too. So let's pause for a second and not be so quick to just try and throw Andor under the bus as if it isn't Star Wars 2. Just because Kenobi, Boba Fett, Ahsoka, and all of the other, even Mandalorian, Star Wars shows have been pretty mediocre compared to what we get in Andor, doesn't mean it's not Star Wars. And just because we finally have a writer and director who's going to hold to the story and the story first, not giving fan service, not giving into nostalgia, doing what's organic for the story and taking it all really seriously and writing something that sticks true to the characters, that builds espionage, intrigue, tension, and gives us amazing payoffs. Don't be mad that you feel like just because we hadn't seen that before in Star Wars, it wasn't George's intent all along. Because those kids who saw Star Wars in the 70s, 80s, 90s, and 2000s grow into adults who enjoy things like what we saw in Andor Season 1. So I don't think Tony Gilroy is actually philosophically opposed or antithetical to Star Wars. In fact, I think George was trying to evolve Star Wars into the very thing Tony Gilroy has done. But that's just my opinion. Let me know what you think down in the comments below. And if you want to see more of what I've talked about in these articles where I break them down and I pull out the nuggets of gold that I think are worth talking about while casting aside all the fluff that people pump into these articles to get you to read them longer, then you can click on one of these videos right here. Guys, thanks for being here. I'll catch you on the next one. Remember, the Force will be with you always.